Hi everyone, welcome back to the next episode in the series of Culture and Creativity in Times of Crisis. And we've been all over Europe with our talks, but I am particularly delighted to come back to the northern part of Europe, to my neighboring country, and to talk with such a powerful woman in culture, creative industries development from Finland. We're going to talk to Silja Suntola and Outi Raatikainen. Welcome, Silja and Outi. Both are very well known and very well rooted in culture creative industries. Silja, you were part of founding and project director in creative industries Finland. Outi, you are running at the moment a culture creative industries consultancy called Pink Eminence, and we will discuss this a bit further. But let's start with the crisis. Finland, in this crisis, have been often considered as one of the successful cases of a country that reacted quickly, put adequate measures in place, and have seen, especially compared with some of your neighbors, a much more controlled outbreak of the crisis. What helped Finland in tackling the crisis better than some other countries?
That's a very huge question, but I think one of the reasons is that Finland is relatively small, and we are basically quite well organized in our everyday lives, and of course I think our government was very wise to act fast, and on the other hand, I think we are as people, Finns usually tend to obey the rules, more or less.
Yes, I would agree on that. And there's a trust towards authorities in general. And I would also say that perhaps historically, even Finland has always had to be sort of self-sufficient. Yeah. So it's in the culture that, we take care. We have that little hidden extra there somewhere in case of some emergency. So I think it played well here.
As we discussed just before the video, that here in Estonia, but also in Finland, I think this holds very much true, that people are actually very much waiting the end of the 2-meter rule so that they could go back to their normal 5-meter rule. Let's not forget that Finland is the least densely populated country in Europe as well. So the idea of space naturally plays an important role. But Silja and Outi, let's look at also how culture and creative sectors, both in terms of the institutions, universities, but also businesses and creative professionals, how have they managed during that crisis? And do you think that here the government measures to support the sector have been adequate?
I would say that it has been a really huge disappointment how slow the government has been. For example, if you think about the event industry that kind of died in one day, a lot of companies and a lot of my friends who work in the event field, they lost the next 6 or 9 months of work in one day, and it still feels like a huge economical shock that went there. And also, if you think about the freelancer, creatives, artists, and so forth, then the situation is really bad.
And I would add that we know that there's challenges in creative industries funding as it is without the crisis. Yeah. We know they're usually small businesses. They lack business skill, production, marketing, manager skills, and so forth. They're not the typical innovation companies or fast growth companies that innovation funds usually fund. So these same challenges sort of double up in a time of crisis. And another thing is that many of the activities like festivals, they are often a mixture of public and private money, which is always a challenge when it comes to funding. Sometimes it can work for you, but in many cases it's very challenging. So again, I think sufficient networks, those are the people that actually have better chances of making it. It's those lone artists and small organizations that are in the faces of biggest challenges.
Quite often people now in this crisis talk about winners and losers. In every crisis there are winners and losers. It seems that of course everybody's almost loser and there are few winners. However, who is winning naturally have to do with digital platforms, also games. And we all know that this is a Finnish powerhouse with Supercells and Rovios. So Angry Birds and Clash of Clans are some of the big names that everybody know, but there are a lot of smaller game developers, digital companies in Finland. Do you see that this argument holds true?
It definitely poses a lot of opportunities for the digital industries, and also especially for cooperation, for instance, with festival managers and digital platform providers or producers or developers. And I think there's a really big place for new cooperation, new services, new digital services in conjunction with other industries. So that's a big promise. And there's a lot of interest in the recent times that I've come across. And we have a few projects going between ICT, coders, the music business, and content production, where they actually are really interested in what the others do.
Yeah, there are definitely possibilities, just like Silja said, but they also kind of forced people to adapt digital streaming ways and online performances very, very quickly. And still in the future, people need to develop them much further if you think about the earning logic of this type of performing and how you actually make a living out of it. They are definitely going to be parts of broadening your audiences in the future, but it takes a little bit more development time. Yeah,
absolutely. And I would add to that thinking of new earning logics, it has been true, I think, for the creative industries in general, once again, but especially now, of course, with the digital tools and so forth. It's a real big challenge. It's something I really hoped to have more of the business people from the economic side to get interested, because I think there's a lot of business people who still look at economics as within one organization, whereas the creative industries works a lot in networks. Yeah. And it's a totally different game. And knowing that game not very many people know it really well. So that's something I challenge also the business people to think about.
Yeah, we're working in an ecosystem which is immensely large, and one of outcome that comes out of this all this crisis time will be some kind of the field getting more organized, and there needs to be more data to show the impact what actually is in the field in culture and events and so forth, because nobody really knows what's the value of the economy and the ecosystem that is built within.
You both highlight something that has been brought out continuously during the crisis, that what's the nature of the digital transformation. The fact that institutions or companies put forward a huge amount of free digital content just to keep their audiences and kind of build trust, which is important. But yeah, where there is no business plan or earning logic linked to that's not sustainable. That's not really a digital transformation. That's kind of surviving the moment and hoping that things go back to normal as soon as possible. Firstly, do you think that things will go back to normal as they were, or we will see some fundamental changes in the way that culture creative industries are operating, or the environment where they're operating in?
Well, it's very, very difficult to say or predict, but on the other hand, people always will have a need to experience live performances, and artists have the need to interact with audiences, and it's very much about the living contact between performances and audiences that it doesn't exist in the streaming, at least not yet. It has to be developed also further, how to interact online. But I think you really don't know what will happen. But on the other hand, I believe that this online streaming and online performing will develop much further besides the live performances.
Yeah, I agree that I really do think culture is a people business. But I do think, and I do hope even, that there will be new services in addition to getting back to live performances and so forth. That, I mean, festivals have thought for years about what they could do the rest of the year, except those 2 days per year that they had the festival. How could they keep up their communications with their fan base or anything else? I hope this speeds up that sort of innovation and thinking. And as digital tools are developing all the time, and again, I think that getting more networks and partnerships between the digital business experts and the creative industries, again, I think that's a promise. But I do think that people have the need to be with people. I mean, during the Corona crisis, I have to say, I even enjoy going to the store just to see a few people.
You use the words a lot as you hope that things will change. You believe that things will change. You are looking forward for this different kind of an approach. Have you actually seen some of that already happening? We have been preaching, you including both of you, for years, the agility, the flexibility, the innovativeness of the creative sectors to be the forerunners of a new thought. Has this preaching proven right during this crisis, or actually we see that there's a lot of inertia, there's a lot of shock, there's a lot of inactivity within the culture creative sectors, and we don't see as rapid and quick change from the business model side, from the sector as we maybe hoped for?
We've lived this crisis for about 2 months now, which is a really short time if you think about developing anything really kind of sustainable ways of doing things differently. But it only took a few weeks, couple of weeks, 3 weeks, to see the first concert, the first online festival that had all these features that will only develop further when we get out of this crisis, I believe. I think the field has been quite innovative.
Yeah, I agree, but I could also add that, again, this creative word, that there's a lot of creativeness in any sectors. There's a lot of digital business that are creative, and there can be very conservative people in the creative industries as well. Mm-hmm. So it's actually like a very horizontal thing, like who is good at dealing in a crisis situation? Somebody else is good at something and somebody's the innovative one. So those crazy innovations can really come from anywhere.
Absolutely. The creativity is not a monopoly of cultural professionals. Yeah. And I've heard once that the most creative sectors in the economy are bookkeeping and organized crime. So you can find creativity in many.
What we need to remember is that in this field, the companies are very, very small. They don't have huge resources to change themselves overnight. They need support, and they need expertise, and they need to learn a lot of new things before they can do that change, even if they think of it. But in respect to that, I think things have really happened.
Yeah, I agree, and I would add that yes. Like I said in the beginning, I think that we know the certain challenges in skills that are typical to the creative industries, which are like lacking business management and so forth. But also perhaps this crisis with the digital business comes all the immaterial law copyright issues that are, of course, with digital distribution, they are becoming even more important.
Absolutely. You already brought forward an element, and I want to actually go further now, and this links to both of your backgrounds as well in terms of higher education and the skills. When we talk about resilience in organizations, or when we look at strategic agility, kind of links different elements, what the organization on whatever level, not on just culture, needs in order to have that agility, both looking at the strategic framework, that understanding where the world goes, also resources. So if you don't have any buffer, as you mentioned, Outi, if you're so small and you not have any reserves in left, of course you're more vulnerable in times of a crisis, a fundamental crisis, than if you would have some backup. But then the third very important link there is skills. I mean, even if you want to be very agile, very flexible, if you want to come up with very quick new solutions, you might lack the skills. Your employees might lack those digital skills, but not only digital. You both work with the higher education. You, Silja, you're the project manager for the Southeastern University of Applied Sciences in Finland. So how do you think in the past maybe 5 to 10 years, the universities, the higher education has prepared professionals, both in culture sectors, but also those other sectors that need to work very closely with culture sectors for crises like this, for example?
I think things are developing, perhaps not always as fast as we'd like to see, because higher education, it's still such a rigid system in some senses that changes are slow and the world is moving faster and faster. And I do think, and I welcome, there's a lot of new initiatives that have within them the sort of learning by doing, the project-based learning, project-based doing, which is not like we have the skills and give them to you, but it's to provide platforms and networks. Okay, you want to do that, let us help you. And that's the learning process. It's not about giving data because you can just Google things or something else. So I think there is a move toward that direction. And I do think that international cooperation also in education is of very big importance, because again, how we prepare students for this kind of crisis when none of us saw it coming really. And again, as everybody's as badly prepared, it's really about getting people together and thinking together of how we can overcome. And again, you probably don't have all the skills you need, but you need to have them in your network and be able to work together. So we come into this theme of multidisciplinarity, which I do think is one of the very important things in education and anywhere in business.
And what I would like to see is the fact that the public funding, that is always a difficult question when you think about small companies and their networks. It would learn something from this crisis and be able to create. We would be able to create new types of instruments that would support all kinds of further development of what we have experienced now, and so that also the public funding situation would learn something from this crisis.
Yes, and I would say too, words like flexibility and speed are really important there, especially for small actors.
Do you think that those strengths that you have had so far will help you throughout the crisis and help you come out of it stronger? or you need to also change your directions, both in terms of business planning, business development, those cross-disciplinary networks, but also in terms of what do we teach our students at universities?
There needs to be changes. There need to be changes. If you think about, for example, building cooperation with the industries or companies and between culture, it comes clear that you need to be able to do more about those things in the future and find new ways of cooperating.
I agree. So multidisciplinarity and multi-sectoral cooperation, I think those are really two key words. And I do think there needs to be constantly changes. I mean, the world is developing or moving really fast. So we definitely cannot stay and think we have it fixed. So yes, definitely.
But Silja, about multidisciplinary approach, crossovers, spillovers, this is a topic that has been talked about the past 10, 15 years. Yeah. There's so many reports, so many attempts to really dissect what actually works, what doesn't work. And it hasn't really, gone to masses, if we may say it this way. And now if you put it in this the crisis mode, don't you think that even less likely, with everybody cocooning in their own problems, a lack of resources, even less readiness to experiment or innovate? So just kind of companies in a survival mode, or you disagree with that and saying this is the moment to open up, to test, to experiment, to kind of build absolutely new ways of collaborations?
The way you described two paths that probably both will exist. Like usually it is expected, or it has been expected from the cultural field that they should be able to generate more private funding, more private cooperation with companies and find sponsors and so forth. But on the other hand, we know that there will be a huge economic crisis in the next years. So we don't know what will happen to that type of cooperation, and will it exist, and to what extent will it exist. So, but on the other hand, that is the direction where you need to be creative, where you need to be able to create value for both parties, and there you need more imagination, more innovative solutions, and also a kind of real seeking of mutual benefits.
And I have to say, like, one positive thing is that I do think there's, like, on a basic level at least, quite a good trust in Finland and maybe our Nordic countries in general between different organizations and public and private sector. And I do really think that is one of the bases for cooperation. If there is trust, then you start to cooperate. And building, you said that doing cooperation or multidisciplinarity, it has been talked about a lot, but it hasn't happened. I do think it's happening slowly, but it's, again, pretty much a people business. So it takes time for people to actually get to know each other. And we still suffer from silos. Even within the creative industries, if we think of, for instance, we have gaming education at XAMK, and there's graphic designers, there's the coders, and so forth, maybe even audio people separately, and they might not even know each other. I mean, oftentimes they do, but I mean, there's challenges within the creative industries, not to talk about between the creative industries and other industries. I do like that there is a tendency now for more multidisciplinary programs where student teams tackle given challenges of real businesses or public sector or something like this. And I think those are opportunities to get to know people from different sectors. And I do think there is a start there, but it is a slow process, definitely.
And one of the things that I personally wish that would come out of this crisis is the fact that the entrepreneurs and the freelancers would be kind of more recognized as people who live and work in this field, so that they would be more visible in the future, and their work should be more valued. And instead of thinking about the fact that culture in Finland is very much of publicly funded way of doing things, but that's not true anymore, because there is a huge amount of very small companies who haven't been kind of seen in being part of the ecosystem, and that is why we need more data of the real impact of how many people actually get their living out of this field, and what is the economic value of the whole system, what kind of services are needed to create one huge event. For example, there may be a small kind of crowd actually producing it, but around them there's hundreds of other people who work towards the same goal.
And I could add that one thing that Outi said earlier, which I also agree is very important, is that the sector should get more organized. They have started to some degree, but once again, it's to make them visible. But if we think once again back, it's just only a little over 10 years when you said creative sector, people were from the creative industries were like, oh, am I part of that? So a lot has changed when we look back. And now at least the creative people usually know what we refer to when we speak of the creative industries.
Yes, you point out very, very important things. One of them is this kind of a holistic or ecosystem approach. We've already seen this in some of the countries where, for example, the government quickly goes in and is ready to support music sector. But by supporting music sector to overcome the crisis, they mean musician. They mean maybe even a concert organization. But then those links in the network, basically the one that provides you technology or lighting or equipment or even tents for the outdoor festival, they are not considered as creative professions, therefore not eligible for the support. Not understanding that if that ecosystem falls apart, then the musicians have much less opportunities to actually thrive in the future. I also understand, or you can correct me if I'm mistaken, that you also agree with this understanding that the role of a higher education, for example, is not anymore talking about, which was present for many years, that we need to turn everybody into business persons. So it's not about turning creatives and cultural professionals, business people. Rather, we are in a need of brokers, mediators, those that bring the creative, the cultural know-how, digital know-how, business know-how all together.
Do you think it's a good advice that an old arts professor once said, like for musicians, that you need to have enough business skills so that you know when you should actually hire a manager? Which means that if you're totally small, I mean, you don't have money to cut off for that manager. You need to be able to that much. And you need to realize when it's so big that, okay, this is not my end of the game, and have that basic skills. So you know when you need, you know what you know, and you know what you don't know.
Yeah, that's true. What you're missing, you have to recognize what you're missing.
We are getting to the close to our chat. Outi, I maybe direct question to you as well. You work, you are the CEO and the founder of a consultancy. You work with marketing. You work with networking. You work with strategy, both organizations and businesses, festivals, etc. I'm just interested and curious. What kind of questions in the past 2.5 months of the crisis you've most received?
The question is that where can we get funding now that we need immediate support? Can you write me a grant application or something like that? Very practical help, because writing kind of official language is not always the basic skill of a creative person. So that is the immediate question. people also seek for kind of support, kind of each other, just to talk and let share your anxiety and your hopelessness. Sometimes it's something that also helps at least a little bit, that you know that you're not the only one in the situation.
So how much of you actually, before answering the question of, where the money is or where the money is not, or can you not help with, writing those funding applications, how much you actually go back to the basics, go to the core of the value proposition and the business model, and ask these questions of, do you think that what worked in the past will work in short, medium and long term?
Well, I think it has been very difficult for smaller companies and festivals to think much further at the moment, because they are living in an immediate crisis of all the bills pouring down for something that you can't actually organize during the summer and so forth. But I'm sure that in future people are able to think a little bit further, and now that they get some development funding from Business Finland, they know that they need to be able to find new ways, and actually very many of my clients are actually very eager to seek for new ways of developing their business, that it would not be so vulnerable in the old way that it used to be.
To what Outi said, that where is the creativity and innovation, I do think it's very difficult to predict the next innovations. They have managed to come from places we would have never guessed before. So that's why I think it's very dangerous also to say, no, that's not going to do it. Yes, maybe we have some idea, maybe to some extent we're right, but still to be open enough and have your eyes sort of open, not to think that we can actually see in the future. A lot of predictions for the future have gone wrong. So we just need to be open for everything, I think, is the only thing we can do.
And basically, I think we all know that creative businesses, they are really built on personal passion. It will never go away. People will always have that kind of passionate attitude towards their work in music, art, whatever part of this field they are working with. So I don't believe that creative field would disappear in a crisis. It comes back stronger, I would say.
Yeah, I will have to agree on that too.
The final question that I've asked everyone in this series to finish with is, if we will have this talk again exactly in a year, maybe in few words, what would you think, what would the world look like?
I'm sure that it's not going to look like the world we used to know. It's going to look different, and certainly something will come out of this and will remain and develop, but it's very difficult to predict what it is. I believe in a kind of new audiences coming from online digital tools, and it actually it develops the audiences for culture and creatives, and that is a good thing.
Yeah, being partly on the same lines that yes, we all know we have huge challenges ahead of us, and a year is a very short time when we talk about these. But I do also want to see good things, like at best, I hope that the value of culture, if we look at the world today, culture is more important than ever in actually not just culture as something separate from us, but in building this unity. And we have the digital tools, and I do see that now when we have been forced to do more virtually all over the world, perhaps we get more accustomed to it and can build and do and create culture even more globally in some ways as a result. And I think all of those new sorts of sets of doing, that a bigger percentage of our daily work will actually be more global, more even deeper in some senses, because we have to come up with that, what is culture really about for our different audiences. That's what I'm really hoping for and working for. And I do hope that in a year we'll see a few little starts of different things from different sectors that prove my point.
I think that this crisis will change people's values.
Yeah,
many forms, and I'm sure that it means that culture and arts will be even more important than before, because they are kind of fundamental values for people.
yes, I absolutely agree on that, and hope that, and like we just finished a seminar where again we come back to the point that being excellent in something has really a lot to do with the ability to reflect and think like out of the box, from your own box, I mean, preliminary. So I hope, and culture and arts is a great tool for that. So now when we have this solitude more than normally, I do hope that those positive things will come up as well.
Thank you. I think that all of us and our listeners can sign easily to what you just said. As somebody has said in the previous interview as well, if you thought that lockdowns were difficult, try to imagine those lockdowns without Netflixes, without books, without music, without those home concerts, without all those things that give us meaning and hope. Then you would see what a difficult lockdown means. So absolutely fantastic to talk with both of you. Thank you both, Outi and Silja, for this time.
Thank you.
Thank you, and all the best to all of us.
Yes.